Happy Monday, everyone. Josh of Severe Weather. Appreciate you joining me here for this extended tropical update. It's now August, and we are heading towards the peak of Atlantic hurricane season over the next 3 months. And as you might expect, things are starting to get more active in the Atlantic Basin. We now have Tropical Storm Dexter, which is not a threat to land, but is another name on the list, and several other areas that we're going to be watching over the coming weeks across the Atlantic Basin. I appreciate you joining me. And if you have not yet subscribed, I encourage you to do so. We are going to have more frequent updates coming up here as we get more storms across the Atlantic Basin. Now, right now, no immediate threats to the U.S. or land. However, we could see development off the southeast coast here at the end of the week, bringing yet another rainstorm into the Carolinas. But after that, we're watching what's going on out over the eastern and central Atlantic, and we still have a lot of time to watch. So at this point, way too early to get too specific on what may happen, but I am going to break down what we're seeing and what's causing the development to pick up and where things may go. Of course, I'm going to do my best, but it is a longer range forecast at this point. So I'm going to share my screen with you all here, and we're going to take a look first at the satellite image across the Atlantic and the Pacific. I'm going to highlight our features on the map. This is Tropical Storm Dexter here. This is the island of Bermuda, so it is moving away from the U.S. This actually separated from a frontal boundary, which is just to the north and west of it here. And that's brought the cooler air down into the eastern United States. In fact, you could argue the front's already down into here because it's a lot cooler and wetter across the southern Appalachians. I was talking to a colleague of mine who lives in Athens, Georgia, where it's been in the 60s and raining all day. And that is highly unusual so early in the season. We're still in the summer season and it's in the 60s and raining. So we're watching Dexter, but at this point, just a name on the list. We are pretty quiet across the Gulf, pretty quiet across the Caribbean and across the central Atlantic. There is an area of disturbed weather I want you to keep an eye on at this point. Wind shear from Dexter and from this front, keeping it at bay, but something we may be watching as it tries to drift in this general direction towards the southeast later on this week. And then else across the Atlantic, we're in pretty good shape right now. In the Pacific, we do have a tropical depression, which should be our next storm. No threat to land. There's another area coming off of Central America that could become the following system after that. So the Pacific remains fairly active, although the pace has slowed down a little bit here. Let's take a look at the official forecast from the folks in Miami, and you can see Dexter on the map. We also have off the southeast coast a low pressure area expected to form off the southeast coast towards the middle and second part of the week. Probably Thursday or Friday is when we may have a trackable feature. At that point, tropical models will probably be run. We may have aircraft go into it to get a better idea of what's going to happen. But you can see, at least for the next 2 days, nothing is expected to develop beyond Wednesday, Thursday, and mainly towards Friday and Saturday, I think. There's a 30% chance, and Dexter was also a 30% chance just a day and a half ago. So that chance is probably going to climb. But again, it's a little bit early to get too specific on that. And then I want you to turn your eyes out to the Atlantic, where we do have an area to be watched towards the second half of this week and towards the weekend. A tropical wave set to move off the coast, showing a 50% chance of development into a depression or storm. The next name on the list, by the way, is Aaron. One of these could get that name. We could even have Fernand. But it's a ways off. So right now, way too early to find out where this is going to go. There have been models that are showing different solutions, going from a system that comes up into the central Atlantic and it's just a fish storm to one that maybe tries to get pushed back towards the west. And neither of those is correct because it hasn't happened yet. But it is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on here. Here's a look at Dexter. This is Bermuda here, where the weather's actually fairly good right now, but this area of rain is going to be moving into Bermuda here shortly. The low-level center is actually exposed here by wind shear out of the north and east here. But most of the thunderstorms are off to the east of the center. It's going to track in this direction, and either way, it will end up in cooler water, and the wind shear will pick up, meaning it doesn't have a long chance but of becoming anything more than a tropical storm. And at this point, a long shot to strengthen much more than it already is now. So we will watch it over the next few days. But you can see the dry air is in place all the way to the south of Atlantic Canada and all the way down into here. You can actually see Canadian wildfire smoke over much of the Northeast and Atlantic Canada. And that is a sign of stable, cool, dry air as well, which will not favor this hurricane. We're not going to have a smoke-a-cane or anything crazy like that. So our model tracks, you can see, are pretty well behaved, moving east-northeast and weakening by the time it passes south of Nova Scotia in a couple days, and then likely a remnant low over the north central Atlantic. We'll keep an eye on it towards the Azores and the British Isles by early next week. And I know we're getting battered by a storm out there today in the UK, so something to keep an eye on. And it's going to take a few days before we know exactly where it ends up, but probably not impacting the UK at least before Sunday, and maybe not even early next week. Right now, wind speed 45 miles per hour. It could get up to about 50. That is the official forecast. And then it should become post-tropical by the time we get to Wednesday night and Thursday. Here's a broader view of the Western Atlantic. Here's the other area we have to keep an eye on. You can see an upper level disturbance right here near the Bahamas, thunderstorm development off to the east. I know there have been some folks talking about another low forming along the front, but in fact, this is actually going to be tropics based. So right now it's dealing with wind shear. It's not in a favorable spot to develop into anything, but over time, we may see some gradual development as it sneaks in closer to the Gulf Stream and towards the southeast. And that's not necessarily a good thing because the system is going to be moving on the slow side, and it will be impacting those of us on the East Coast here who may have a beach weekend planned by Friday and Saturday. So we're going to take a look a little bit more at what may happen with that. First, I'm going to show you, this is the GFS from Tropical Tidbits. You see where the front is, where it's moist and wet over Georgia and over the southern Appalachians today, and a feed of moisture continuing out of the central Gulf all the way up into the Appalachians. Those of you that got hit by Hurricane Helene are going to see quite a bit of rain out of this. In fact, there's flood watches in effect from the Greer office here for upstate South Carolina, northeast Georgia, and parts of western and even the western Piedmont of North Carolina here. But then you see our low pressure trough here beginning to head towards the Bahamas and eventually towards the southeast coast. This is Wednesday afternoon. And as we set this into motion here on Thursday, you can see low pressure heading towards the coast of South Carolina by Friday afternoon. Now, this is just one model, and it's a GFS model, which is typically very inconsistent. In fact, a couple of days ago, it had a powerful storm coming up the East Coast. Now it's backed off and gone with a more expected solution here of a weaker system here that may try to spin up last minute into a depression or storm. Now, if you all remember Chantal from about a month or so ago, that was not really a big deal. It did strengthen some, but as it came inland, it dumped incredible amounts of rain into the central Piedmont of North Carolina. Now, tough to say where this is going to go. So I'll show you a model here. This is the European. You see how wet it is in the Western Carolinas. But then as we move along here, you can see, yes, our front gets stuck across the Piedmont. We have a cool air damming event where a couple inches of rain certainly could fall within a day. Places like the Piedmont Triad down to Columbia and maybe Augusta, Georgia, Wednesday into Thursday. But then you see the moisture gathering off the coast here Friday into Saturday. Poorly timed for those of you that like to go to the beach on the weekends here, but that's what we're looking at. So there is certainly some significant rainfall potential here. You can see the European takes that moisture up into eastern North Carolina and central and eastern Virginia. And over the weekend, some significant rainfall potential in 24 hours, as much as maybe 5 inches of rain could try to form. This is just one model, but it's not the only model showing it. The GFS indeed has some heavier rainfall here on Friday night and Saturday for the Outer Banks, for the Wilmington area, for Myrtle Beach, and tough to say how this will play out. So at this point, we just have a threat for a rainstorm at worst case, maybe a tropical storm, but certainly something we need to watch again for significant amounts of rainfall. So we are going to track that area here. Elsewhere, the Caribbean's in pretty good shape here. You see the fast easterly flow here. The trades out of the east are quickly sending in some dry, stable air from Africa here, which won't last forever, by the way. You can see here in the Gulf of America, we have a front that's activated here with rain and storms off the western panhandle of Florida, but wind shear is awfully strong, so we're not expecting anything to develop there. Now we look east of the islands, and pretty cloudless at this point. The intertropical convergence zone is buried south of the 10 degree latitude here. So we're going to see spotty showers, but otherwise typically breezy weather here for the next few days. Now, I don't think it's going to stay that way too much longer, because then you can see a big wave getting ready to emerge off the African coast. That is over here moving through Mali, and that'll be heading off tonight. Here's the Cabo Verdes, and this is the one that models are trying to develop here in about 5 or 6 days as it moves into the central Atlantic. Now, you'll see here to the north of it, we still have an extreme amount of Saharan dust, which is not unusual. And that right now is stealing the show here and keeping things limited. But over time, we should start to see more rising air as this moves towards the central Atlantic. And that would be certainly the first time this year we really had a threat come off of Africa that looks like it could develop. This year's been pretty minimal at this point. You can see the ACE points have been very low. We've only totaled about 1.5 ACE points. And remember, my forecast is in the mid 100s. So we've got a long way to go this season. But just 4 tropical storms, neither of them doing a whole lot. In fact, Dexter may be our biggest storm yet, and it's still not going to be an impactful storm. And we are below the curve. Right now, we're at 1.5 as of Friday. The climatological average is actually 10. It shouldn't say 2001, by the way. It should say 2025. But you can see we're about to go through a spike. Climatologically speaking here, once we get past about August 14th or 15th, that number shoots way up and the seasonal average gets up to 122. I think we're going to be on the higher side of that. I'd say closer to 150, but we're going to have to make up some ground, which I think is definitely possible. We were here this time last year. I don't see why there's no reason we couldn't be there again this year. And the reason why is that we are marginally towards a La Nina event where the Eastern Pacific is below average. Now we're sort of in the neutral zone, but I don't see signs that this is going to bounce back up above zero and we're going to head towards an El Nino. In fact, it may go the other direction. So when we are in a La Nina, or at least in a neutral phase here, that means the wind shear is going to be at or below your typical values in the Atlantic. When we're in an El Nino, typically we have stronger wind shear, which certainly makes things more hostile. But when we are in a neutral or certainly a negative ENSO here, then we typically will have lower than average wind shear. Water temperatures here are running on the warm side. They've actually warmed more substantially here over the Gulf as well as over the Western and Central Atlantic. Much of us are above average. The reason we haven't seen waves that come off of Africa develop, really there's a couple of reasons. But you can see here not being helped is the fact that water temperatures are still below average. We've also had dry air come off of Africa, and we just haven't had a lot of rising motion in the first place. We've not had a lot of vertical instability. However, you will see over the last 7 days, we have not only warmed up over the Gulf and over the Caribbean and Southwest Atlantic, but we are warming faster than average. That is what this is showing, that the anomaly is going up faster and faster, with the exception of off the Carolina coast. But over where the storms are going to form, we are warming more substantially than we have been. As we, whoops, let me get that off the screen there. As we look further into this, we will see that the ocean heat content anomaly over the main development region here is beginning to climb. Now, it's not where we were the last 2 years, but it is heading up the curve. And we are now in, I guess, third place, if you want to look at that, over the last 13 years. So we are definitely not heading in the direction you might want to see. They need to update this from Gulf of Mexico, but you can see, look, where we've gone here over the last few days. Our ocean heat content in the Gulf is now running exactly where we were about a year or two ago. And of course, we had a lot of major storms in the Gulf, going back and looking at storms like Ian, looking at storms like Idalia, looking at storms like obviously last year with Helene and Milton. You can see that this is obviously a disturbing trend and something we're going to have to keep monitoring as we head into September, when we typically see that ocean heat content peak in the Gulf of America. And in the Caribbean, we drop below the curve, below trend, and now we have recovered, and the ocean heat content is higher than average across the Caribbean. Not quite as high as it was over the last 2 years, where we saw with Hurricane Beryl, thank goodness, but it is definitely climbing faster and faster. Now, I want to show you this Hofmahler diagram, and I'll try to keep this very simple because it is a complicated matter here. When we have colors that are cooler here, we see rising air. When we see colors that are warmer, we see sinking air. So here's sinking, here's rising air. Right now, the sinking air is basically or the rising air is basically over in this direction here on the other side of the globe. Now, as we move this along here in about a week or two, you're going to see we've got this big wave of the MJO, which is going to enhance thunderstorm development here to the east of Africa. What that means is we should see a lot more action coming off of Africa over the next couple of days. And so we're going to lose the sinking air that we have right now over Central America, and we're going to eventually see more rising air over time. But we need to watch what's coming off of Africa, not what's potentially developing over the Gulf. This is not favorable, at least for the time being, to see things pop up close to land. However, storms that come off of Africa may initially struggle to develop until they get closer to the islands and into the Southwest Atlantic or into the Caribbean. And at that point, unfortunately, we're to the point where we need to take action because we have fewer days before a storm forms to when it may hit more close in development. So we're watching that, but I will show you this. Over the next week, the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting is indicating that we are going to spike past the mean and be at almost twice our typical tropical activity over the next week. That number actually climbs more next week to 2.5 or 2.2, so 220% of the average next week. The following week, it's still 50% above average. And then as we get to the end of August, we settle back a little bit. But remember, the average is coming up at that point. So what this means is after a couple of relatively quiet months in the Atlantic, we should be trending towards a lot more action in the coming weeks. Hence my graphic, which says we're going to see several storms. Now, looking at the European ensemble, you see Dexter on the map here. Don't get too carried away with what you see here. But as we move past tomorrow, we start to see some possibility, at least half of our models show low pressure trying to form here west of the Cape Verdes. We also see some support here for gradual development off the southeast coast on Wednesday. Here's Thursday, and you see odds are better here that this could become a tropical system, at least a depression. We're almost to a 50-50 chance by Friday morning. 60% chance here, by the way, over the central Atlantic. And then you see whatever does form here has a small window to do so before it makes its way into the Carolinas Saturday night and Sunday. Here's the next wave we're watching. And oh, by the way, there's another one behind it that may emerge here over the weekend and maybe the next one to watch. Now, I'll lay it out for you here. Dexter's heading this direction, so that's not a threat. The next area has got about 2 days to develop when it comes up towards the Carolinas. That's over here right now. The wave we're watching here is likely to come up into the central Atlantic. The GFS has tried to show it curve back. We won't rule that out, but it's not the likeliest scenario. And then the wave behind it's taking a lower track here, and that's the one we're going to have to watch in the islands as we move past this weekend. In fact, the timeline on that potentially to impact the islands would be as soon as next Wednesday. So we've got about 8 or 9 days to watch that. And again, I'm not going to try to make a forecast 8 or 9 days in advance and expect it to be accurate. It's just something at this point that we need to be watching. Showing you the possible solutions here real quick of where the models take things. Again, these are spaghetti plots. You can see here's Dexter. Then we potentially have some development as we get into the 7th and 8th of August here off the southeastern coast. And whatever forms you can see heads towards the Carolinas and will stay fairly weak. The feature that's coming off of Africa is more than likely going to turn away to the north and east of Bermuda. But if it fails to develop, then we do need to watch it as it could try to take more of a track towards the Bahamas and Florida. That's not the likeliest scenario, but it is a possibility. We've seen that happen before where if it doesn't really develop and it misses that upper level curve that takes it out to sea, then it stays weak and low in latitude. You can see the next wave coming off here we need to watch. There could actually be one that tries to develop out ahead of it. So 2 separate waves next week, both of which we need to watch in the Lesser Antilles. The first one could go all the way across the Caribbean if it tries to develop. That's a big if. The next one may try to take a track more up towards the Greater Antilles and towards the southeast. But both of those, as you can see here, will be things that we need to watch in the United States. And then the European, finally, that was the AI. Here's the European. You can see the Europeans they are developing this wave coming off of Africa, but mostly taking it to the east of Bermuda over here. We do have low pressure development near Florida. There's some crazy solutions here I wouldn't get too carried away with, but I like to watch the trends. And you can see here's one, and then here's 2 down in here, which takes that westerly track. So things are going to get very busy here soon. We have a little bit of time now to watch. This is the European operational model. Here's Dexter. Here's the low pressure area we're watching. But you can see the Atlantic is going to be a lot more moist than what it is right now. See, here's where we are now. Pretty darn dry out in here due to the high pressure zone that's in place. Fast forward a week, that high weakens, bigger high forms up here, and that could mean more trouble here across the main development region of the Atlantic towards the end of this week and beyond into next week. And you can see the European here shows one feature coming up this way, then something that we definitely need to be watching more closely. But again, it's about 15 days away. So that is it for the Atlantic today. As we get to see what's going to come in over the next few days, what comes off of Africa, I'll have more for you. Real quick, in the Pacific, we do have a new tropical depression, which will probably be our next tropical storm. Here's the remains of Gil. That is going to go north of Hawaii. This is going to go closer to Hawaii, but they both land in the same area. Then we've got another system, 70% chance of forming, that could get closer to the Mexican Riviera. So we want to watch that one. In the Western Pacific, we've had storms come and turn to the right and recurve east of Japan. Crosa and now Bailu. We've got another system not likely to be a threat to land, another one after that. But you can see the Western Pacific is busy, but things are recurving out there, which is great. We'll keep an eye on this feature, though, here around the Philippines. And here you can see here's Tropical Depression 8E, likely to become a stronger tropical storm, but not affecting any land. And we have another system that may get closer to land that we need to watch here later on this week. So that's all I've got for you today. That's a lot. But the main things I want to leave you with, Dexter's not a threat to land. It's just another name, and a name I would not have chosen if you watch TV, but it is what it is. We may see Aaron and possibly Fernand here by about this time next week. And then after that, I expect we'll see Gabrielle and Humberto. And most of those are going to come off of Africa, but we could see some development close in, especially off of the southeastern coast. Less likely near the Caribbean and Gulf to see something forming. But again, we'll have to watch for that. So I hope you'll join me here again over the next few days with more updates to come. But before I leave, I wanted to leave you with a Christian word of encouragement. This is the word of God for the people of God. And this is a very critical verse in the book of John. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God so loved the world is, I think, something that a lot of us tend to forget. Believers and non-believers, people who are Christian and people who are not Christian. But what sold me to Christianity was the fact that God would sacrifice his son and then bring him back to life so that those of us who chose to believe in God's promises would be able to live eternally in heaven. In my opinion, or in my personal belief, and probably the belief of many of you, that is the one direct line to heaven. That is believing in Jesus Christ, knowing that you are forgiven of your sins, and that eternity is waiting for you. And that is something that you cannot just earn. It is something that is gifted to you once you've chosen to choose to follow Jesus. And that is something I've chosen to do. And the reason why is very simply, I don't want to gamble on my eternal future. Eternity depends on what I personally believe. And I could go on and just truly ignore the fact that all these miracles have been done historically and biblically, and then gamble with where my eternity was going to be and where I was going to end up, that I would not be saved. Or I could just go out in faith and say, if others have been saved, then why not me? So if you are struggling in your spirituality, if you're struggling with your beliefs, don't feel bad about it. Don't hold back. I'm happy to pray for you. Please feel free to list any of those requests and I'll spend time praying for you. That's all I have for you all today, but I welcome you back here soon. God bless you.